Hello everyone, and welcome back. For those of you in the audience, please remember to keep your masks on for the duration of the talk. We really want NarraScope to be accessible for immunocompromised people. The next talk is by Judith Pintar. She's the director of the Game Studies and Design program at the University of Illinois in Champaign, Urbana-Champaign, I believe, and is also on the board of directors for the Interactive Fiction Technology Foundation. Without further ado.
Hello, former director on the board of directors of the Interactive Fiction Technology Foundation. As Zarf indicated this morning, we are turning around all our administrative positions in IFTIF and inviting new blood and new energy, and nobody needs to rule forever. So I'm happy to have done 2 tours of duty on the board of directors for IFTIF, and I'm part of the education committee. If there are any educators in the audience, we can always use new blood in the education committee too, so definitely come by and catch me in the hall. Okay, so I'm going to start out with a couple of apologies. So my voice is scratchy because I have allergies. I'm allergic to something here, and the air conditioning is making my sinuses drain. So apologies in advance, a little bit of water, a little bit of coughing, but I'm okay. Second, trigger warning, there are a couple of theory slides here. So if you're like, so if you're theory phobic, you just glide right through them and I'll get to the better stuff. But for people who eat that up, so I have a couple of slides for you. So, all right, am I going to both do this? I feel like I want this over here. And this should be here. Okay, get this. All right, so a little bit about player types. So my talk, my talk. We think about, after that wonderful and amazing keynote, we do also think about narrative in visual ways. NarraScope is about narrative in all its senses. This talk is a little bit about interactive fiction, text-based, with less of an emphasis on visual images. So I'm talking really about the quizzical question of what's a player type when you're reading text, right? So that's sort of the puzzle question, but I'm going to just sort of enter into the world of player types more generally, and I'm going to start out with a little sort of historical look at how we have conceptualized player types, sort of a new approach that I'm working with, and then sort of applying that to thinking about what our player types, if such a thing might be, for those who love interactive text-based games. All right, so everybody knows this model. Richard Bartle came up with the original, well, was, I'm sure, not the first classification, but the first one to hit hard, specifically about multiplayer video games. And his first types ask people to sort of identify, what are you in the world of video games? Are you a killer? Are you an achiever? Are you a socializer? Are you an explorer? And these were definitely types that were sort of based on your choices, your actions. They changed as the player typologies became models, and principally psychologists and educational psychologists began to work with these models and test thousands of players. But they weren't really, Bartle's original types were actually pretty closely connected to MUDs originally. Then they were applied to video games. And it was really about what made people comfortable. Were you comfortable if people were wanting to kill you, right? Were you comfortable if you weren't allowed to kill other players, right? So it was really a lot about comfort and enjoyment. When it shifted to the psychological models, it was way less about comfort and enjoyment than it was about motivation. What motivates you to play? And because it was psychologists doing this, and they were using existing sort of models of personality, it became sort of narrowed down to idea of type, which was largely asocial and discrete. So who are you as a personality? And then gender was in there, so attempts to understand, do women play games differently from men? And then even neurobiology, do we have neurobiological types? So it was really about individual identification of your type. people as type. Separately from all of that, another whole set of conversations and typologies were emerging from the immersive experiences of people in a wider range of interactive media and modalities. And these included the LARPS, Nordic LARP, EduLARP, tabletop role-playing, also interactive theater, traditional storytelling, and then VR, video games, also simulations, play, children's play, improvisational theater, and interactive fiction. So interactive fiction is on this chart. And if you feel skeptical that conversations about bodily immersion are relevant to text, just think about your non-interactive text experiences. Think about what your body does when you've been assigned a text you do not want to read. Right? You sort of shrivel physically. What is your body doing when you're reading something truly frightening? What is your body doing when you're reading something steamy, right? So you are having physical differences. And I don't know, I read at 14 The Lord of the Rings for the first time. When I finished the last word of the last page, I turned to the first book and read the first word of the first word on the first book, and I lived in it continuously, right? So the sense that text can immerse you in a world, we all know that this is true. So it's just not that strange of an idea. And then interactive narrative allows you to get at other kinds of immersion. So the rough sort of understanding of what immersion is, it's narrative plus interactivity plus bodily presence. This is very vague and very contradictory because the literature comes from all these areas. Everybody, so okay, so this is the slide for which I gave the trigger warning. So I'll go through it quickly. So the foundational vocabulary for this side of the conversation of player types came from a couple of origins. One was learning studies, which has foundations in the early 20th century, going back to the early 20th century, and then mid-20th century literary theory and film studies, and that it all sort of came together in the 90s as new media. And some of these terms, all these terms are to some extent familiar to you, I'm sure. It was from literary theater that we got diegetic, extra diegetic. You're in the narrative, you're immersed in the narrative, or something's happening which is outside of the narrative. We got from film studies the difference between voyeuristic, visceral, and vicarious experience. Voyeuristic, you're watching, you're witnessing, you're not feeling too much. Visceral, you're identifying with a character, and vicarious, you're inside the experience. I remember, and I'm again revealing how old I am, but I saw Jaws in the theater the first time before people knew what happens in Jaws. And the theater was packed, and I was in the front seat. Front row was the only seats. And when the shark comes at you on the screen like that, the whole front row, not only did the whole theater scream, but everybody in the front row, myself included, lifted our legs up to our knees. Like this. Like the whole front row, up came our knees, right? Like we're, right? So, so film theorists have been thinking about immersion in terms of narrative and also visuals for a very long time. And then, of course, Janet Murray and the holodeck book in the 90s and the other people, she sort of gets credit for a lot of things that were happening in that era, congealed around this understanding of immersive storytelling. So what I want to point out here that there are the two conversations about immersion sort of separated in that era. One was sort of narrative immersion, the idea that you're inside a story and it can be broken, that spell can be broken. And then something that was coming from video games was these other kinds of immersions, more physiological, tactical, strategic, and centered around this, the flow state. So you want to be in that flow state, and you don't want that to be broken. And as the bonus for having suffered through this slide, I'm going to tell you how to pronounce Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, right? So you've seen this written and you try your hardest to never have to say it, but there it is for you, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Got it? You might want to note that, right? So then you seem smart at a party. Okay. Where a lot of the work on understanding immersion as a type came from were from two parallel traditions, Nordic LARP in Europe largely, tabletop not only, obviously, tabletop role-playing in America not only, but sort of iconically. And each one defined, starting in the early 2000s, a set of role-play types. And they don't fit perfectly on each other, but these are sort of what they are, which is a dramatist, simulationist, gamist, immersionist, and I don't know whether to explain these. I think I'll just go to my model. They're going to emerge as reflected in what I'm going to show you. But basically, somebody who's interested in the gameplay, somebody who's more or less performing, somebody who's interested in dwelling in the world, and then somebody who's fully immersed in the role, right? And so there have been attempts to reconcile the two sort of whole worlds of player type, but the problem with all of these is they tend to put them on an axis as if these immersion types are the same, so they're trying to and they also keep them discrete because they're sort of stuck on the idea that people have a type. And one type, which doesn't change, right? So this is inadequate for thinking about immersive experiences. And then because it's on a single axis, it conflates narrative preference and embodied preference, which are actually two different things. Why is that a problem? So this is a picture of me in my 20s. The funny part about this picture is that I remember when this picture was taken, I was in the middle of a show. I was not supposed to be visible behind the puppet. I was in the middle of a show and I spotted the photographer in the audience. So I took the one step to the side and gave him this shot, but never missing a beat in the script, right? So was I immersed in my role here? Was I not immersed? The narrative immersion and embodied immersion are two different things, and they vary independently of each other. And if we distinguish them, something kind of exciting happens. If you put them on two different axes, you see that you get a set of correspondences between these. So I'm going to get to the more complex typology in a minute. And again, the orange line there. We have to step away from the idea that immersive types are personalities or kinds of people and talk about them as kinds of experiences. So kinds of experiences, you can have multiple kinds of experiences. Your preferences can and do change regularly. So I took sort of this whole world of what people have talked about in typologies and simplified it tremendously to create an ideal typology. That is to say, it doesn't come from the data of having observed a lot of players. It's a logical typology. I said, what are three kinds of narrative immersion? What are three kinds of bodily immersion? And then I collided them. So it's really very simple. I just divide all narrative engagement into you're attached to the narrative, you're detached from the narrative, or you're opposed to the narrative. You like the story, you're into it, you're about the story, but you're willing to read it, play it, be in it, or you really hate the thing. And you might still play it, right? So three sort of broad buckets of narrative immersion. Separately from that, you may want to bring your body into the experience in different ways. So what I call invisible engagement is, I guess, what in film studies would be the voyeur, right? You're willing to be there, you're watching, but you don't want to be seen by anybody. You don't want to have an interaction with anybody. You're not in a role. You're yourself, you're just looking, right? You're there. Then there's aesthetic engagement, which this is the performer, right? You want to be seen. You want to interact. You want to engage. But what you're engaged with may have more to do with yourself than what everybody else is experiencing, or even with the narrative itself. And then there's enrolled engagement. And these are very close to sort of Nordic LARP categories, these ones, is where I'm lifting these from. But enrolled means you're in the role. You don't care if anybody looks at you or not. You're not thinking about yourself. You're not self-conscious. You're just in your role. It doesn't matter. You could be alone. Somebody could be there seeing you. You're just in your role, right? So if you take these and you just collide them, you get 9 immersive preferences. Watch my time here. The chart's really simple. So it just takes the 3 and the 3 and it shows you all the combinations. And because I'm going to now go away from this slide, I put it on a page for you. So if you want to go to the Google Doc, you can refer back to the chart as I talk here. It also has, this page also has the link to the article where this typology is explained. If you want to use it, go ahead and use it, test it, do anything you want with it, and the citation is there too. Okay. Do y'all get it? Who wants it? I will come back to it. All right. So everybody has this is the way I see it, everybody has a dossier of immersive experiences. And I'm going to walk you through mine. At the end of the talk, I'm going to ask you to self-reflect on your own dossier. So as I'm going through mine, be thinking in your head how this means. And by the by, I'm going to explain the typologies. All right. To be invisible but attached. So this is how I play multiplayer games. So this is a good tagline for me. I play multiplayer games alone. Right? That's my comfort. I like being in a big shared world. I like to be there alone. I'm absorbed in the story. I'm embodied. I like to identify, but I don't want to interact with people. However, if I'm in a big game with friends, I detach from the narrative, right? Because I'm talking about real world stuff. We're chatting. This is what Bartle would have called the socializers, right? So, but I'm not always a socializer. Sometimes I'm this. Sometimes I'm fully engaged in playing. But sometimes I detach from the narrative and I'm performing in a bit. I'm self-conscious. So I'm aesthetic and detached. I'm narratively detached. I'm aesthetically embodied. All right, so if I'm tired and trying to distress, I click through dialogue, even in interactive fiction. Do you click through long dialogue? Do you scan, not read closely, right? So when do you read closely? When do you not read closely? It's not a personality type, it's situational, right? So sometimes I play for extrinsic rewards, that is to say points or bonuses or symbolic capital. So when you grind in a game while watching a video here and texting on your phone, you are not engaged with the narrative, nor are you bodily immersed in that game, yet you are immersed in a way. And so I put a name on that. You're invisible and detached, but it's a way to be immersed in a game. All right, so if I'm running the show, if I'm the storyteller, I came from improvisational theater background. So if I'm the director, I'm the storyteller, I'm the game master in a role-playing experience, I'm aesthetic, meaning that I am self-consciously performing and world building. So I'm attached to the narrative, I'm building the narrative, but I'm not enrolled in it, nor am I alone, right? I'm self-consciously building. So I'm aesthetically embodied and I'm narratively attached. When somebody else is running the show, I love it when I am not in charge, right? So when I'm not working and somebody else is driving the bus, right? And also in VR sometimes, I like to be fully immersed in the character and the experience as I can be. But I only feel safe enough to do that under certain circumstances. And there's other circumstances when I'm not. So for example, if a lot of new theater, interactive theater, I prefer to be invisible in an interactive theater performance because being seen feels like work. So I will go invisible for some interactive experiences. So for me, it's conditional on my sense of safety, right? So which of these is my personality? You see that a personality model doesn't work for these things because who you're with affects what you're going to do. And I learned this from when I was a school storyteller right out of college. My degree was in folklore, and so I was like, oh, get a job as a storyteller. I'd never done it, right? And I was imagining, oh, I'm going to I play the harp. I imagine playing my harp to the kindergartners, and they look up at me sweetly. No. I arrived at the gig, and they take me into the gym, and through all the doors, the kids start streaming. The entire school, from kindergartners to 6th graders, that's my audience. Right? Try to amuse 5-year-olds and 12-year-olds at the same time. I bombed so bad, right? I'm shocked that I ever went back, right? But I learned so much from them about this topic, actually, is when I started thinking about this, because I couldn't get certain kids to engage in certain ways, and I misunderstood them. The little quiet kids, like, they wouldn't, no, like you try to give them a noisemaker, I did a lot of interactive stuff in the shows. No. The little girl's sitting in the front, cross-legged, so sweetly, no. And then I remember this little girl, ding, I gave her 2, and she gave 1 to her friend. And then she rattled wildly. So all it took for her to feel comfortable enough to engage was her friend to be engaged too, right? So I've been thinking about this for a long time. All right. The bottom row, the opposed, this is griefing in various ways, right? So to be invisible and opposed, this is sort of anonymous griefing, and it's also what I do when I am doing collaborative game design with students, and I go in anonymously and I make changes to what they're doing. Yeah, is it ethical? I don't tell them I do it, I just sort of do it. But there it is, I have griefed them, right, in an invisible sort of way. Oops. This is performative griefing, classic griefing, and I don't do it, but some people love to do it. So it's an immersive preference, right? You want to disturb other people's experience. It's aesthetic, you want to be seen, you want the attention, and you don't like the story, and you're going to change the story to something you like. Right? And so I don't do this, but there's been lots of times when, as a game master, I have to aggressively change the direction the story is going for the safety of some of the people, or whatever reason I have to do it. And some of the players, the other interactors, experience it as violent for me to make those changes. So these can be positive, creative, generative. They can also be destructive and negative, right? And then there's a whole uncomplicated literature on griefing anyway, which has to do with safety and communities and identity and politics and lots of things. So griefing is complicated. But so I have 3 sort of categories for it, but it's even more complicated than that. And then sort of the scariest player preference here is to be fully enrolled and to be opposed to a narrative. And this is people who forget that they're role-playing. And there was this time in high school when I was playing the board game I didn't want to play, and I said to everybody, I really don't want it. What was it? Risk? It was some sort of battle game, and I said, I only care about my prince, this little character piece. I said, this is my baby, and so nobody should touch my baby. And then so I played the game, and of course, one of my friends made it his job to kill my baby. Right? And I, 30 decades later, what is it? I have not forgiven him. But arguably I ruined the fun of everybody at the table when I flipped out when he killed my baby. So this was me enrolled 100% in my role in that game. It was not a role-playing game, it was a board game, but there I was, enrolled inappropriately in a board game and completely opposed to the rules of the game. Right? I was not playing the same game as everyone else. But these are scary people here. It can be stalkers. It can be all kinds of things. So when you lose touch with reality, enrolled in a game, and then you're not with the program of the game, this can be a really dangerous combination for some people. And you need to edge them up out of opposition into detachment, remind them it's a game, or you need to edge them sideways to the left here, out of being enrolled into being aesthetic. So you're performing here, this is not real, right? So out of the sense. And Nordic LARP in particular has so much attention paid to safety, security, and dangers for self and others in terms of this immersed enrollment kind of thing. All right, so a lot of what I'm interested in is not just identifying these roles, but understanding both from a design point of view for designers and for those of us who design interactive experiences, to understand that people are different, and then also to understand social and political context around these preferences, and that if we don't acknowledge or ignore these preferences, you get some bad outcomes, and also that people misinterpret. So women gamers for forever are misinterpreted in terms of their choices as if it has something to do with gender, some essential innate sort of gender thing, and not social circumstance in and around the choices that a woman might make in a gaming environment, right? And the choices they make in a different sort of environment, and safer environments, etc. So this little story is actually a true story. It happened to me many times. I would go into classrooms and do sort of improvisational theater, and the teachers would hover, and they didn't always like the controlled chaos of my classrooms. So a child would drop the F-bomb or would knock over a chair because they were in role, right? They were doing what their character would do. The teacher does not interpret them as enrolled and attached to what's going on. The teacher sees them as disruptive, interprets what they're doing as trying to get attention, meaning aesthetic, that it's about themselves, and that they're opposed to the narrative. They're disruptive of the what I'm doing, the story, and that they're disruptive by trying to get attention to themselves, aesthetic opposed. When that's not what's happening at all, and they get pulled out, sent to the principal, whatever, parents are called, whatever, they arrive to the classroom the next time, and they are invisible and detached. They don't want to be seen, they don't want to interact, they sit there, they're very unhappy. Now, I can tell you, and it's unscientific, but that way more often the child who will be pulled off will be a child of color, right? And it will tend to be a boy and not a girl, very often. So the teacher is making assumptions, so I could just say, about what a black child is doing when they're loud or boisterous, that a white girl, let's say, who drops the F-bomb, everyone laughs, ha 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 ha. There's an interpretation of that action in the context of this performance space. So this is really important to think about, especially because as we're doing more and more interactive and immersive educational experiences, kids lose choice. They don't have a choice not to engage in these immersive and interactive things. And there's a really interesting literature from physical education and kinesiology on forced play. And the bullying that happens, and sort of a whole set of negative psychological things that happen in enforced play if you're not thinking about kinds of comfort, students' comfort, with different kinds of interactions. And so I fear we're not thinking about it enough as we rush to do more and more immersive things in classrooms. All right, so question, are these types relevant to IF? Well, in my thinking about this, I go back to sort of my own personal experience. And as I said, I first started thinking about types as a performer. So I started out as a storyteller for children, then I became a storyteller for drunk adults in bars and Renaissance fairs, and then I became improvisational theater director. And in that same era, I started to write interactive fiction, and I started to teach it almost as soon as I started to write it. And I was active on CompuServe, the gaming community. CompuServe Gamers Forum was a place where a lot of game developers were hanging out in that era. And of course, this was the late 80s, early 90s, and a lot of those game developers had been written, were still, to some extent, writing narrative-rich, text-based games. And so I wrote a game called CosmoServe, which simulated the experience of CompuServe in that era. And it was a simulation. You had to complete with the sound of the modem. So it simulated a DOS environment, and you had to go onto a DOS computer. It was very slow. It was purposely really slow, loaded really slowly. And then you had to do DOS commands, then you had to use the dial-up modem, then you went online, and then it replicated what CompuServe looked like, and you went into the forum and you posted and you do this and that. So it was a simulation. And to register the game, you had to send me the meaning of life, and people also told me what they thought of my game. I didn't ask them, they just did, right? So I asked them for the meaning of life, and they told me the meaning of my game. And that was when I started to really think about kinds of players in IF. Because the people who wrote to me liked it, didn't like it, and I'm like, who are you, and why are your opinions so different from each other? Why were your experiences so different from each other? Who are you? So I started to first sort of wonder about sort of my readers, players. So I think most people who don't enjoy text-heavy games and narrative experiences probably imagine that most readers are invisible and just love the story, or just loving the story like you might read a book. Right. Oops. But the people who registered the game and contacted me wanted to continue that interaction. They wanted me to see them. So I'm an NPC in the game, giving hints. You can find me in the game. They could talk to me there. It wasn't enough for them, really. They wanted to talk to me, and they wanted me to see them. Meaning they wanted the game to go past the bounds of the narrative. And it was aesthetic in the sense that they didn't want to be invisible. They wanted to be seen. We now have, we had social media then. You had to be a member. You had to pay to go online too, right? So social media is cheaper now. So you can extend your experience by reviewing, by judging in competitions, by just talking and chatting, by streaming your own play experience. Thousands of ways that you can engage with a narrative, not invisibly, but aesthetically, where you become an object of other people's gaze, your opinion and your experience. Oops. Okay, so I said that the game simulated a dial-up modem, and I got many, many comments from people saying that they were enrolled in the game in the sense that they felt that they were going online. So I had succeeded, the simulation succeeded in making people feel that they were inside a real CompuServe experience and were going online. So I knew that I was hitting some people in that sense. Then there's all the people I didn't hear from, right? So maybe the majority of people who tried to play the game didn't like it, didn't finish it. They didn't register it. So we have to assume that a whole bunch of people played it and didn't like it, stopped playing, or maybe they played it to the end and were like, eh. So the invisible detached. I have no idea. They didn't contact me. How do I know? Right, all right. But if they were aesthetic detached, I would know about them, right? These were people who didn't hate the game. They're not opposed. But they wanted to be part of the production. And there were people who just, in that era, every new game that came out immediately had, well, it's true now, but I mean, we had hint systems. So there were walkthroughs. We have walkthroughs now. We have videos now. But there were hint systems, and the hint systems were super clever. They didn't just tell you the answer. So these actually were works of art, these hint systems. And people put in a lot of energy to take my game and to make hint systems for it and to do stuff. So they were aesthetically engaged, but they were kind of about the story, right? What was fun was exploring the story, mapping the story, finding all the points, and then regurgitating it and giving it back to everyone else and putting their name on that, right? This is my hint system, this is my thing. So they were aesthetically engaged. Whoops. And then, oh my God, it was such a shock. I had speedrunners. Right? Like I had no idea that you could speedrun a text-based game, right? And They were trying to win in the fuse moves. The problem was you had 24 hours to complete the game, but you couldn't really finish it in 6 hours because it was simulating a day. So there were conferences that you had to go to at certain times of day, but they figured out that there were ways to advance the clock. So you could lie down in bed and advance the clock by a couple hours. You could download, and so this is a joke of that era, you could download files, and it would take like 2 hours to download a file, and then it would be corrupt at the end and you'd have to like start over. So like different files, so they discovered ways that they could advance the clock to get through the 24, well, my point is they spent a lot of time doing this kind of work, and they ended up being wonderful, wonderful bug testers for me, because they found everywhere where mechanically, the mechanics of it didn't work perfectly, and they wanted it to work perfectly so they could maximize it. So they were fully embodied, enrolled inside my world. They just didn't care about the story. Like they were wrecking the story for themselves, right? By playing it in this bizarre way, but they were completely and 100% committed to my game. How much time they spent in it over and over and over again, right? I wrote in what's it, Spag or somewhere, that your jokes are less funny the 50th time around, right? So you have to find ways, well, I'm gonna get to designer things in a minute. All right, so just really quick, the griefers. All right, so some people just said mean things about my game anonymously. So sort of invisible griefing, they just did, people say mean things. And at the time, it was sort of, there was no such thing as woke then, but the main character was, you couldn't judge gender, their name was RJ, and then there were 2 points in the game where you're just asked for your gender and your sexual preference, and this affects some things later in the game, so that you don't, actually, if you have the sexual encounter, you can't win, but at least you're presented with the possibility of a sexual encounter that is more appealing. I mean, you don't have to be presented with something you don't want to be presented with, was my reason for doing it, right? But people kind of hated that I did that, strangely. They're like, well, obviously this software developer is a guy. It's like, well, like, is it obvious that the software developer is a guy? But they would just say mean things. So this is invisible griefing. Oops. Okay. Aesthetic opposed, these were the mean reviewers. So if you say mean things, they put your name on it. You're aesthetically opposed. You're not just opposing the narrative. You want attention for opposing the narrative, right? And so you all know the judges of competitions who could give feedback in a way that's not mean, but choose to give feedback in a way that's mean. And it's a kind of griefing, right? And then the enrolled opposed, this is interesting. These are people who wrote me to tell me they refused to finish the game because they feared that I was downloading a virus onto their computer. And so I have to say that if in the DOS environment you did check disk, and it looks exactly like you're doing check disk on your own computer, it would show you that there were all these files multiplying, and then there was like virus software you could run, and it told you had a virus, right? So, so fair enough. They were afraid but they were not actually plugged into the internet, right? It was like the game was on one floppy disk. But nobody got crazy and said that I sued them or said that they actually got a virus from my game. But so there was a sense in which these people believed so much they were in my game that they refused to finish the game. Right. So, I'd like to hear from people some examples beyond my own sort of dossier of change. How do your preferences change? So either on the narrative, but let's say more interestingly on whether you want to be invisible, whether you want to be seen, whether you're being performative, or when you're fully immersed so that you don't care about that. What contexts and situations cause that to change for you? Yes? Okay, so tell me about that. So if time is short, what? So you're detached from the story, and you're also probably kind of invisible. You're just sort of, yeah, you're grinding. Get a couple points. I got a minute. Click, 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 click. Yeah. Others, yes. Oh, so okay. How do you like it or not like being watched? Okay, other people. Yes. Right. So this is about being seen partly, right? So being perceived. So it's your comfort. It's about your safety and comfort. Yeah? Yeah, or was there something else there too? Shame? Guilt? No. Shame? No. I see. Right. So very specific to the narrative that's going on as well. Yes. Yeah. Other folks on those lines between visibility, performance, and letting go? Like, anybody want to say how you can be made to feel safe? But say it's anything else you want to say too. Yeah. Okay, that's lovely. They said they wanted to be aesthetic or performative if the people around them would be cooperative and accepting of that, and that they could be enrolled, fully enrolled and engaged if the world supported that, right? So that's interesting. So different contexts. So some are about people, some are social context, and some are structural, some are design-based. Right, wanting to be invisible out of fear for being judged. So wanting to play certain games when you're alone in the room and not having people around you or hovering, looking at your choices and what you're doing. So that invisibility, so we tend to think, like you might assume invisibility makes you less immersed, right? So that's a continuum, and that embodied immersion is more immersed than invisible immersion, but it isn't, it's differently immersed, right? And you can be more deeply, maybe narratively immersed with that safety of that invisibility, right? Than having that full body experience or the losing yourself in it. Yes. Thank you for bringing that up, because this is an area where these issues are structural, where some people are prevented from immersing in certain ways, right? So if your text-based game does not have a reader, right, cannot be read, then that narrative is unavailable completely, right? And there's this assumption, maybe, that people with a disability that make a certain aspect of a game somehow don't like the aspect of the game that they're missing, right? So the example, my son gave me this example. He said to me, he wrote to the article, and he said, Mom, he said, from the design, actually the next slide is about design. We're sort of heading toward design. He said, if you assume that somebody who's autistic and has sound sensitivities wants to have a less immersed experience. And it's just that you haven't designed an option to turn down the intensity that would allow them to have a more, right? So this assumption, you're assuming a personality based on a contextual situated circumstance. And a lot of that can be, so we need to finish up here. So let's actually move to the next, oh, here it is again, a reminder, narrative design. So why do we need to think about immersive preference? So there's a couple thoughts on here, but I'd kind of like to hear yours, just the one I put on here. Not only does it help us to define our audience differently than we have defined our audience, right? I mean, we game companies distinguish demographics, and then they point to certain demographics. But this is trying to sort of slice it finer than that a little bit, and say, what if we understood that people's preferences change? So in the middle of the game, if somebody playing our game, their preferences change because they just got a piece of bad news and their mood has just changed and they were playing in a certain way, they don't want to be kicked out of their game, can they change their level of engagement? Do you allow people to click through your gorgeous, beautiful, precious text? Do you make them read and then put a time limit on how long each screen is up, right? I mean, to what extent do you allow people to treat your game lightly if they need to in that moment and still enjoy it? So are you friendly to speedrunners? Do you interact with your fans? Do you encourage that extra fans? So give me some more design issues or concerns that thinking about this more finely might give you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the guidance thing is good, right? So if you have a server that allows player versus player, and that's clearly marked, and then there's conventions and there's rules, because then there's areas which are definitively marked as not wanting that kind of behavior, right? So codes of conduct have emerged without explicitly saying these things. Codes of conduct that determine ways of behaving do provide safety for people outside. First, yes. Mm-hmm. That's right. Knowing ahead of time you might buy that ticket. Well, otherwise your friends are like pushing you to attend, and you're like, no way, man, no way. It's like going to a comedy club and sitting in the front row. right? Like, you know, you are in terror. You, if you are an invisible type of person, but your friend is like, yeah, man, right? Your sloppy drunk friend, and like they love being humiliated on the stage, but like you're sitting there in terror. So I worked Renaissance fairs, and it's definitely what do you call it? A petri dish of immersive experiences, because you'll have like, you know, I played the harp and telling the story, and you have a couple, and one of them is like just rapt and listening, and the other one's like checking their watch, and they're looking at their phone, and they're doing everything to disrupt the immersive experience of their partner, and you're like, will this marriage make it? I don't think so. And then think how excellent kids are at destroying the immersive experience of their parents, right? I mean, and then what engages them and what they want. So the idea is that player types, immersive types, are this roiling mix of context, and how can designers respond to that reality, that what we don't have is a neat set of player types, right, that we have traditionally designed for, in a sense. Sydney? Play testing, right. Right, so play testing can make these things emerge, but I wonder if, like, you should have the same play tester play at different times of day, and after they just had a fight with their partner, and after they haven't eaten for 6 hours, and right, the middle of the night, the early morning, caffeinated, uncaffeinated, like on the rag, you know, like all these things, like that might affect your ability to be present in different ways. So I'm going to end it there. Thanks so much. Yes, message me on Discord here, or catch me in the hallway, or email me. I'm happy to talk about this stuff. Thanks so much.